The histories of Halloween and Day of the Dead have many similarities and many differences. Be sure to take notes on the T-chart in your packet. We're going to go way back in time to the Celtic Empire in Europe. You'll notice here that the Celts, which were a certain ancient tribe, controlled most of Europe for a couple thousand years. If you look at this Celtic area here and compare it to a modern map of Europe, pretty much the entire continent of Europe was run by Celts for several hundred, if not 1,000 years. The Celtic culture was an agrarian culture, which meant that they were farmers. They lived outdoors, they hunted, they harvested. Their homes were conical. They really did not spend much time in the home at all. Most of their life was outside, but you can see there was a place to get out of inclement weather if necessary. Here are some modern reenactments of Celtic culture, so please don't think that they had Sperry's back in the Iron Age, because they certainly did not. But from approximately 1200 BCE to about 50 BCE, the Celts celebrated a holiday called Samhain and practiced a religion called paganism. Now, please do not look at this star and think Satanism. It is absolutely not the same. What we have here is a pentagram, which is a pentacle, a star, inside of a circle. And it represents the 5 elements: spirit, air, fire, water, and earth. Don't confuse it with the satanic pentagram. You'll notice in the satanic pentagram, the star is upside down, and it is meant to represent a goat's head. This is Baphomet, or Satan. We definitely do not like this guy, and paganism has nothing to do with that. Notice that this is a pagan blessing that you would send to someone who also believes in paganism, or the modern version of paganism, which is neo-paganism, or even the belief system called Wicca. You'll notice that it says blessed. We don't bless people if we're satanic, so definitely do not confuse the two cultures, the two belief systems. Our right side up pentagram over here shows us that we are talking about paganism, which was the belief system of the Celts during the Iron Age. Notice the wording on this blessing. The wheel has turned, the veil has thinned. We're going to come back to both of those concepts. But first, let's look at what celebration we're giving a blessing for. The celebration looks like it's called Samhain. It is not. It is actually pronounced Samhain. This is in the Celtic language, so do not expect the letters you see to sound like the phonemes that you hear. Okay, the ancient Celts believed in the cycle of life. It was central in everything that they did, everything that they practiced. So in this cycle of life, something had to die to make space for, or to fertilize the land for, something else to come to life. So if you know anything about agriculture, you'll know that when a piece of fruit falls off the tree and rots, that rotten flesh actually fertilizes the seeds so that you can grow a new tree. The pagans also believed in the cycles of sunrise to sunset, the waxing waning moon, the cycles of animals and insects. Everything they believed in was a cycle, a circle. So here we look back at the wheel has turned. Samhain was a festival that was celebrated at the time of the harvest. You may have noticed yesterday morning that we had a harvest moon. That was a very red moon, very large and very low in the sky. This was a sign to farmers that it was time to bring in the harvest. So here we have some Celts harvesting some grain. You'll notice that the harvest time was a time for celebration in their culture. You'll also notice that there are many references to blessings and many references to getting through cold winter months and surviving through the harsh winter. Samhain was sort of one last hurrah to close out summer, to harvest the grain, to slaughter the livestock that they would need to get through the cold winter. The time of the year where Samhain takes place, which is going to be the first few days of November, is almost exactly between the autumnal equinox and the winter solstice. This time is very significant in pagan religion. They believe that at this time, the veil between the living and the dead is the thinnest. What this means is that now don't expect that to sound like it looks, the Ishi, which are the fairies that live in the other world, are able to cross into our world. Also means, here's some more of the Ishi, and here are the fairy king and queen, the Ishi fairy king and queen. It also means a higher instance of death, because not only are the Ishi crossing into our world from the other world, but humans are actually passing out from our world into the other world. Now, this may be proven by an increased rate of death in the months of October, November, and December. However, if you think about it scientifically, this is also flu season, and we're talking about pre-vaccination days. It's also very, very, very cold. So neither of these scenarios bode very well for human survival, especially for the very sick, infirm, or very young. Now, this guy right here, not a very nice guy. He's the Grim Reaper. He's supposed to bring death. He uses his scythe here to scoop up souls and take them to the other world. Well, that's our modern interpretation of the Grim Reaper. In the times of the Iron Age, he was actually not seen as a bad guy. As a matter of fact, his tool should look pretty familiar. It's actually a farming tool, a scythe. Here's a sickle, a smaller farming tool that's somewhat related to the scythe. So the scythe that the Grim Reaper carries is actually from the cultural background of the people who believed in him. Grim Reaper is not someone to fear. It is simply someone who carries us on through that cycle of life. So death begets life, begets death, begets life. It's considered completely normal in agrarian cultures. Here we have some modern reenactment of the Celt pagans celebrating during the harvest moon with a bonfire. The bonfire was very culturally significant. Its role was to rid the air of all of the evil and to keep the evil spirits that would pass through the veil during this thin veil time, keep those evil spirits away from us. Fire was considered cleansing, and the people used to actually dance and breathe in the smoke and use the ash. They'd rub it on their faces, they'd rub it around their homes, and use the ash to cleanse. All of the people who went to the bonfire would then bring home some of the fire from the community bonfire back to their home. Now, you and I both know that you can't just carry fire. You have to carry it in or on something. Carrying a torch or a candle, you're likely to have your fire go out on you because of the wind. So since this was the autumnal season and we had lots of gourds, lots of squash that was being harvested, was being carved out and made into meals, we had a lot of empty gourds. These empty gourds were then used as lanterns to carry the fire from the communal bonfire back home to keep the homes lit and warm and to keep evil spirits away. Why do you think these gourds had holes carved in them? If you said it's because the fire would have suffocated if it didn't have some oxygen, you're absolutely right. Can you predict what modern aspect of Halloween came from this lantern made out of hollowed out gourds? Jack-o'-lanterns. These are two authentic jack-o'-lanterns, several centuries old. You'll notice that they're hollowed out, and these actually have faces carved in them. This gourd that had holes cut into it evolved into the jack-o'-lantern. The face was carved into the jack-o'-lantern to scare away those evil spirits we were talking about coming through the veil. Here we have some little trick-or-treaters. Now, this does not date back to the Iron Age. Obviously, they did not have cameras in the Iron Age. However, this face mask does date back to 18th or 19th century Halloween celebrations in the British Isles. Now, one of the theories about trick-or-treating is that when people were heading on the long journey back to their homes, they got tired along their walk, so they would stop and ask for food. Now, that's one theory of where trick-or-treating started. Another theory was that during the Samhain celebration, people would dress up like the Ishi. Remember the Ishi spelled like this, the fairies? They would dress up like the Ishi and perform ritual dances at different houses. Now, some people say that these performances, which could be the forerunners of dressing up in costumes and going to people's houses, that these performances were either meant to scare the Ishi away, to fool the Ishi into thinking they were someone else so that the Ishi wouldn't steal their souls, or possibly even to impersonate the winter spirits and try to trick people into giving them offerings of food instead of leaving their offerings of food outside for the winter spirits to come collect. No one is 100% sure of the roots of trick-or-treating, but either way, we do know that costumes and masks were involved. People did go house to house. They were given food, and their intent was either to scare or deceive the spirits. Obviously, trick-or-treating has come quite a long way since the Ishi of the Celtic times. Eventually, the Celtic Empire fell. The Romans took over Europe, and you will notice here that the Holy Roman Empire completely engulfed what used to be the Celtic Empire. Emperor Theodosius I, this handsome gentleman right there, ruled in the year 380 AD that Christianity would be the legal and official religion of the Roman Empire. As you can see, this was enforced, and not really very nicely, upon the people. The Romans and the Celts fought for centuries, back and forth, over which cultural traditions would be celebrated. It turns out that the Romans, as we know, ended up winning, and the Romans saw this Samhain holiday celebrated by the Celts as blasphemous. Blasphemous means sacrilege or against God. So the Romans told the Celts that they could no longer celebrate Samhain at all. Well, that did not go over very well. So the next idea the Romans came up with was, fine, if you're going to celebrate Samhain, we're going to Catholicize it a little bit. So the Catholics already had a holiday which was called All Saints' Day. Now, All Saints' Day was originally celebrated the 20th of April, in and around Jesus Christ's actual birthday. But the Roman Catholics moved All Saints' Day to the 1st of November, intentionally to coincide with Samhain. So they used the celebration that the Celts already had and modified it so that they could slowly and discreetly, without freaking the Celts out, convert them to Christianity, specifically to Catholicism. So how did we end up with Halloween from All Saints' Day? Well, All Saints' Day was called Hallow Mass. Now, if you look at these words, hallow means holy, like our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. That means your name is holy. And Mass is a Catholic church service. So Christmas is Christ's church service. So All Saints' Day, which was November 1st, was referred to as Hallow Mass. Now, the day before All Saints' Day, this is not erased very pretty, and I apologize for that, but the day before All Saints' Day then would be Hallows' Eve. So hallow, again, meaning holy, and Eve is short for evening, so meaning the night before, like New Year's Eve or Christmas Eve. Well, over time, evening sort of ran together and it became een. And hollow plus een equals Halloween. And I was very happy to find this picture on Google Images where Halloween is spelled the old way. Normally, of course, we don't have the apostrophe between the two E's anymore. Now, the rumor started, once Catholicism started to take root in Europe, that if November 1st was going to be All Saints' Day, that meant that coming through that veil was only going to be good spirits on November 1st, which would mean that they would overcome any bad people or bad spirits. So over hundreds and hundreds of years, this was interpreted to mean if you were going to do anything bad, you better do it the night before All Saints' Day. Well, over time, these quote-unquote bad things became real bad things: arson, property destruction, vandalism. And in some cultures, the night before All Saints' Day actually became a pretty horrific time to be outside of your house. In the UK, it's referred to as Mischief Night, and almost every city doubles their police force that night. Every police officer is going to be on duty on Mischief Night. Even in the United States, we have some people who take Halloween way out of hand, beyond the suburban neighborhood, bunch of kids in cute little Anna and Elsa costumes running around and getting candy, and you'll see some very serious destruction, like this picture that was taken in Detroit several years ago. Now, since that Devil's Night or Halloween got to be so rough, around the turn of the century in the United States, with the Irish and Scottish immigrants bringing this Mischief Night into the United States, people started sitting out on their porch, armed, as this gentleman is right here, and with a candle or some source of light. They were doing this to protect their house. This tradition turned into the porch light tradition in the United States. If a family's porch light is on, then they're participating in trick or treat. If their porch light is off, you can't expect to get any candy there. Now, if we go way back to our Ishi again, the belief was if you did not give an offering to the Ishi, you would have an entire year of bad luck. That evolved over the millennia to be, if you don't give out a treat, you are going to get a trick. And of course, those tricks could be something little, like someone singing a silly song to you, or something pretty huge, like arson. Definitely something to be avoided. Now let's compare Halloween with Dia de los Muertos. Dia de los Muertos started with traditions in the Aztec Empire. Contrary to popular belief, not all of Mexico celebrated Dia de los Muertos. Since the Aztec Empire is down here, our northern and central areas of Mexico did not celebrate Day of the Dead until the early 20th century. So in the early 1900s, Mexico declared Day of the Dead to be a national holiday. Once it became a national holiday, then it spread up north farther. So since you had people celebrating a cultural tradition for centuries and centuries before more people got in on it, you can expect the celebrations to be very, very different in different parts of the country. Not to mention up here in the USA, where Day of the Dead is pretty much just a day to wear skeleton face masks and drink tequila. So the way it is celebrated down in the original Aztec area is a lot holier, a lot more religious, and a lot more intense. So you read about the Mixquic traditions. There are different traditions in different cities throughout Mexico. We're mostly going to be focusing on the original area of Mexico, which was the Aztec Empire, as opposed to the Mayan Empire, which was around the Yucatan Peninsula, the Inca Empire, which runs down into Central America. We're looking at the Aztecs. Now, the Aztecs were very interesting people. They had they had many, many, many gods and goddesses, but two of them are going to be very significant in regards to Day of the Dead. Now, this lovely lady right here is Mictecacihuatl. Mictecacihuatl. And what this literally means is the queen or the lady of Mictlan. Mictlan is the realm of the dead. Her job is to preside over the bones in the realm of the dead, and she's also in charge of what used to be a 1 month long festival of the dead. Now, this is her handsome husband over here with an equally impressive moniker. This is Mictlan Tekli. Mictlan Tekli. He is the lord of Mictlan. That's the northern section of the underworld. He is usually represented by a bloody skeleton with a necklace made out of eyeballs. You can kind of see right here, those are supposed to be eyeballs. He has a headdress made out of owl feathers and paper banners. And he has ear spools, which not very easy to see here, but I'm going to show you pictures of them later, made out of human bones. Ear spools are what you guys call in modern times as ear plugs or tunnels or gauges. Here is a picture looking like a healthy young 20-something-year-old. Obviously, this is an actor impersonating the Lord of the Underworld, but you can see the feather headdress, the skull face. Clearly his necklace, however, is not made out of eyeballs. Here were your punk rock Aztecs. They had tongue rings. They had gauged ears. Some of the gauges were made out of stone. Some of them were made out of human bones. They definitely had tattoos. So a lot of the things that you would expect to see in your generation at a punk rock nightclub, you also saw in the Aztec Empire 3,000 years ago. Now this, of course, is the lovely lady of the underworld. Whenever you see a skeleton woman with an absolutely monstrous hat, you're most likely looking at the lady of the underworld, also called the Lady of Death, the Queen of Mictlan. She has a bunch of different nicknames. One of her most common nicknames, though, is La Catrina. And you will see a lot of young women dress up like La Catrina for Day of the Dead. Here you see lots of Catrinas, women with a skeleton face and a really big hat. So the modern name is La Catrina, but of course we know that historically she was really Mictecacihuatl. So who were the Aztec people? Were they just punk rockers with gauged ears and pierced tongues and lots of tattoos? Well, they were that, but they were all very nice people. Okay, well, nice people who every once in a while made a human sacrifice. Okay, maybe they made a lot of human sacrifices. And cannibalism. There was cannibalism. So very nice people with lots of human sacrifices, cannibalism, and they started a lot of wars. And there was even more sacrifice. Never mind. They were nice. But as you can see, by the way they lived, they had a very, very good supply of bones. Lots of bones. Lots of bones available to them at all times. The Aztecs believed that the bones were like seeds. So this picture might look a little creepy to you, but it's actually not meant to be. It's meant to be heartening. It's meant to remind us that from death comes life. Remember that life cycle of the butterfly we were looking back at in the Celtic ritual? So an original Day of the Dead skull, also called a sugar skull, or in Spanish, a calavera, will have a skull and either a butterfly, sometimes a moth, or a flower. Sometimes it'll have both moths and flowers. But the point of this is to remind us that from death comes life. That's the cycle of life. So originally, 3,000 years ago, they literally thought that bones under the ground grew trees. Now, in modern times, they know better. They don't think that a skull is going to grow an oak tree, but the skull still does symbolize a seed and a chance for new life, which is why an authentic calavera is going to have flowers and or butterflies. If you see any other design, for example, there's a lot of them that will have a cross right in the forehead, a Christian cross. Those are not authentic Day of the Dead calaveras. Here we have our lovely Katarina with her enormous hat. The skeleton is not something scary in Aztec culture. As a matter of fact, neither Halloween nor Day of the Dead originated as a scary event. We've made them scary when we created a culture where death is something to be avoided and prevented. In modern culture, your chances of walking out of a hospital healthy are extraordinarily high. So high that if someone does not make it through something, we're all stunned and depressed. In the times when these traditions started, not making it through an illness was the norm. Surviving the illness was the exception to the rule. So they had to see the death and life as a cycle. They couldn't be brought down by it, or you just wouldn't be able to leave your hut. Here you see some modern teenagers wearing their normal clothes that they'd wear every day and this skull-painted face, because not only in the Aztec culture, but in the celebration of Day of the Dead and modern Mexican culture, that skull or skeleton is something to be accepted. This sounds a little creepy or weird to us, but think about your wardrobe. Do you have something with a skull on it? A sweatshirt, a pair of shoes, a necklace? You might. Here we have some examples of some of the beautiful makeup that's done to celebrate Day of the Dead. We've got our authentic skulls, flowers on this lady's forehead and cheeks. The reason the nose is painted black and the eyes are painted black, they're supposed to look like the hollows of the skull. These ladies even went so far as to draw in their vertebrae and collarbones. This is actually fairly common, but in modern times, people don't tend to take the time to do that. So how is Day of the Dead actually celebrated? Well, Day of the Dead is actually a 2 or 3 day celebration. In many cities like Meeksweek, they're going to start on October 31st. And what they do that day is they prepare. Now, the central focus of Day of the Dead is the ofrenda, which, as it might sound like to you, is the Spanish word for offering. Ofrendas can be either inside or outside. They can be put together at the gravesite, or they can be built on tables. If they're done on tables, they're usually 3 tiers. 1, 2, 3. And that's because they're the 3 layers of the world: the underworld, the living world, and the world of the gods. If an ofrenda is done outside, it is done at a gravesite. Now, there's a wide variety of ofrendas, from the very, very simple, so underneath here there is a person buried, to the very, very ornate. So depending on the family's wealth and the amount of time they have and resources available to them, there's a wide variety of grave decorations that could be done. Another ofrenda is what we call in English an altar. That's the one that I was showing you that has 3 tiers. 1, 2, 3. These altars are put together inside people's homes. There are many reasons for the altar. Maybe you live in a big city and you can't get to the cemetery. Maybe you're in a different country and can't get to the cemetery. Or maybe you're going to do both. You're going to decorate the gravesite and you're going to put an altar in your house. So after your family has the celebration in the cemetery, you'll bring them all back to your home and continue the celebration there. There are many reasons to have an altar in a house. Here is a fairly simple altar. Obviously, it's obvious to me, maybe not obvious to you. This is a fake altar. It's done for Julia Child. So as you can see, we've got her egg beaters, her Crisco, her food. These are all things that she would have liked in life. There also are some required things to be on an altar. We'll get into detail about that later. This altar has several, but not all of them. Some of the big ones are a photo of the deceased, candles, food. There definitely has to be salt on an altar. There's usually a glass of water, which I don't see here, and several other things that are not on this altar. Here is obviously a very ornate altar. We are most likely looking at a politician or a head of state, so it's probable that the entire town got together to create this altar. Notice this feature of the altar. There is an archway made out of marigolds that the spirit is supposed to fly through, and there's a path showing the spirit how to get to the altar. The spirit follows the path because of the light of the candles or luminaries and because of the smell of the marigolds. Once the spirit gets close to the altar, there will be incense on the altar that they will also be able to smell. So they're using the senses to get the spirits to come back to the house where they used to live. And then what they do is they put things that the person used to like in life on the altar. So their favorite foods, or if it was grandma, maybe you'd put her knitting needles on there. If it was your cousin and he liked to race cars, maybe you'd put his car keys on there or his trophy that he won. Things that these spirits would enjoy if they came back home just for one day of the year. Now, the first actual day of Day of the Dead is November 1st. This is called Dia de los Angelitos. And for me, it is a heartbreaking day. It's not meant to be heartbreaking. It's meant to be optimistic and uplifting. It is the one day that a family can spend where the spirit of their small child returns to spend time with them. So again, it depends on the income and the resources of the family. Here we have a family living in poverty. This is all they could afford to bury their small child. And then here we obviously have a family with a considerable amount of money, and they have the child's gravesite completely decked out and decorated. It's common to see the child's favorite toys, sometimes even formula bottles, put on the gravesite during Dia de los Angelitos. The second day, which is November 2nd, is the one that's actually Dia de los Muertos. This is the day where the adult spirits come back to visit. So as you can see, these grave sites are considerably bigger. Now, in different cities, this is done differently. When you read about Miskik, you read that the family stays at the gravesite all night long, and they will eat, they will play music, they will sing, they will dance, they will tell stories about the deceased. Often there's a lot of drinking and the stories begin to get funny. If you've ever had a wake or if you've ever had a bunch of family over the night before a funeral, you'll notice that people deal best with depression and sadness by treating it with humor. So there will often be very, very funny stories told about the person, about the things they did when they were alive. And this gets people laughing, and it reminds everyone Day of the Dead is supposed to be fun, not scary. The altar that is created for Day of the Dead has some very specific instructions on how to build it. As you can see, you can even buy infographics that tell you exactly what to put on what level, specifically what kind of items to get. Notice that there are a lot of words that really don't look like any Spanish you know. Let me erase my mark so you can see that word that I just brought your attention to. These words come from the language spoken by the Aztecs before the Catholics came. Note on this altar over here, we've got our skeleton, we've got our candle, a lot of the things I told you to expect. This here is called pan de muerto. Pan means bread, so pan de muerto literally means bread of the dead. And it's usually powdered with either flour or sometimes powdered sugar, and it's made to look like bones on the top of it. Now, the food that's put on the altar is actually put there for the spirits to eat, and the drinks are there for them to drink. Now, consider Mexico's climate. It's hot and it's dry, and they're leaving out a plate of food and a glass of water for 2 to 3 days. At the end of the celebration of Day of the Dead, that water is going to be evaporated and the food will have begun to rot. What the people believe is that the spirits who can't actually eat and drink because they don't have bodies, eat and drink the spirit of the food. So that's why the food is rotting and the water has evaporated, because the spirits of the people have eaten the spirit of the food. So remember, Day of the Dead is supposed to be happy. It's feliz. It is not meant to be depressing, and it's not meant to be scary. Just want to leave you on one little note. Remember that in 1200 BCE, in the Celtic Empire of Europe, and in 3000 BCE, in the Aztec Empire in Mexico, two cultures 5,000 miles away from each other before the time of boats, airplanes, and cars both believed in a cycle of life, and both had a way of getting family and friends together to celebrate lost loved ones. Both believed that those loved ones came back to Earth to be with them during the harvest season. Now, I'm not telling you what to believe and what not to believe, but that sure does make you think that there might be a little bit of truth in Day of the Dead and Samhain. Feliz Dia de los Muertos.